Elon Musk sat quietly in his office, a rare moment of stillness amidst the whirlwind of innovation and ambition that defined his life. The idea had come to him during a conversation with a colleague about human behavior. What would happen if people didn't recognize him? How would they treat someone who seemed to have nothing? The thought lingered, turning into an irresistible challenge. Weeks later, on an overcast Thursday afternoon, he finalized the details. His disguise was simple yet effective: secondhand clothing from a local thrift shop, scuffed sneakers that barely held together, and a scruffy, unkempt wig. A small makeup team completed the look, adding just enough wear to his face to erase the familiar features that graced magazine covers and news feeds. The transformation was stunning. Elon Musk, the billionaire innovator, now looked like any man who had fallen on hard times. He chose his destination carefully: the Copper Elm, an upscale restaurant in Santa Fe, New Mexico, known for its exclusivity and elegant clientele. It was the perfect testing ground. This wasn't about shaming anyone, but about understanding human nature. Would people look beyond the surface, or would they let appearances dictate their actions? Before leaving, he took a final glance in the mirror. The reflection staring back at him was unfamiliar, almost haunting. For the first time in years, he felt invisible, stripped of the identity that had defined him. With a deep breath, he stepped out the door, his heart beating faster than he expected. The ride to the restaurant was uneventful, the city bustling with life as usual, but for Elon, every moment felt charged with anticipation. As he approached the grand double doors of the Copper Elm, he hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then, pushing them open, he stepped inside, his experiment officially underway. The Copper Elm exuded sophistication. Chandeliers cast a warm glow over meticulously arranged tables, and the murmur of conversation mixed with the occasional clinking of glasses. Elon's entrance caused a subtle ripple. Patrons glanced up briefly before resuming their meals, but the staff lingered, their eyes darting toward him. He stepped cautiously onto the polished hardwood floor, aware of every scuff his worn-out shoes made. A hostess, impeccably dressed in black, approached him hesitantly. Her professional smile wavered as she took in his appearance. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice polite but strained. "Yes," Elon replied, his tone steady but soft. "I'd like a table for one." The hostess glanced toward the bar, where a manager stood watching the interaction closely. Her smile faltered further. "We're fully booked tonight," she said quickly, her eyes flicking to a row of empty tables. Elon caught the glance, but said nothing. Instead, he waited, letting the silence grow uncomfortable. From across the room, a young server named Sophia noticed the exchange. She had only been working at the Copper Elm for a few months, saving up for culinary school. Something about the man's demeanor struck her, not pity, but curiosity. She could tell he wasn't just another wanderer looking for shelter. "I can seat him," Sophia called out, stepping forward before the hostess could dismiss him entirely. The room went quiet for a moment. All eyes were on her, including the managers, who frowned but said nothing. Elon offered Sophia a faint smile as she led him to a small table near the kitchen doors. It wasn't the prime spot, but it was a seat, and he was grateful. "Thank you," he said, his voice sincere. Sophia nodded, placing a menu in front of him. "Take your time," she said warmly, ignoring the whispers that started up around her. Elon observed the room carefully as he flipped through the menu. The glances from other diners ranged from curious to disdainful. He overheard snippets of conversation, some murmuring about how restaurants should have standards, others speculating whether he was lost. He had his answer. Most people judged based on appearance alone, but Sophia had done something different. She had looked past the exterior and treated him with dignity. As he sat there, he knew one thing for certain: this experiment wasn't over yet. Curiosity wasn't. The reactions of those around him had painted a clear picture of how society often judged based on appearances alone. Now, it was time to see just how deep those biases ran. Elon adjusted his worn-out jacket and stepped toward the hostess stand. The room grew even quieter, the whispers escalating into murmurs of disbelief. Some diners turned away, unwilling to meet his gaze, while others openly stared, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright disdain. The hostess stiffened as he approached, her hands resting uneasily on the polished wood of the stand. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice strained but forced into politeness. Elon nodded. Yes, I'd like to speak with the manager. At that moment, the manager, a middle-aged man with an air of practiced authority, stepped forward. He had been watching from a distance, his displeasure evident. Is there a problem? He asked, crossing his arms. Elon met his gaze evenly. No problem at all, he replied. I just wanted to thank you for the experience. The manager frowned. Experience? Elon gestured toward the dining area. Yes, this has been quite an enlightening evening. The confusion on the manager's face deepened, but before he could respond, Sophia approached cautiously, sensing the shift in atmosphere. She glanced at Elon, unsure of what was happening, but ready to step in if needed. Then, with deliberate slowness, Elon reached up and removed the unkempt wig, shaking his head slightly to let his natural hair settle. He wiped away the subtle makeup that had altered his features, and suddenly, the worn-out man standing before them was gone, replaced by the unmistakable presence of Elon Musk. Gasps rippled through the restaurant. The murmurs turned into stunned silence as recognition dawned on each face. The very man they had dismissed, whispered about, and in some cases outright ridiculed, was one of the most influential figures in the world. The manager paled, his posture stiffening. Mr. Musk. Elon held up a hand. Don't bother, he said calmly. I've already seen everything I needed to. The weight of his words sank in. The diners who had cast judgment now avoided his gaze, their discomfort palpable. The servers who had whispered among themselves stood frozen, their previous mockery now a source of deep embarrassment. Elon turned to Sophia. You, however, he said, his voice carrying warmth, treated me with kindness when no one else would. That says a lot about you. Sophia swallowed hard, her face a mixture of surprise and relief. I just did what felt right, she murmured. And that's exactly why people like you matter, Elon replied. Would you mind showing me the back of the house? I'd love to meet the rest of the staff. The request caught everyone off guard. The manager scrambled to regain control. Of course, please, right this way, Mr. Musk, he said, his tone now overly eager. Elon ignored the sudden shift in demeanor. He followed Sophia through the kitchen doors, leaving behind a room full of stunned, regretful faces. The lessons of the evening were clear. Kindness should never be conditional, and respect should not be dictated by appearances. As he stepped into the kitchen, he knew one thing for sure. The Copper Elm would never be the same after tonight. It was impossible to ignore. The same people who had judged and dismissed Elon were now struggling with the weight of their own actions. The contrast between their earlier behavior and their current unease was stark. Sophia took a deep breath, still processing the whirlwind of emotions. She looked down at the check again, the bold $50,000 standing out like a beacon of hope. It was more than just money. It was a validation of the values she had always believed in. The restaurant, once buzzing with hushed judgments, was now filled with an uncomfortable silence. Some diners muttered apologies under their breath, while others glanced around, searching for reassurance that they hadn't been as unkind as the next person. One older man, who had earlier questioned why Sophia had bothered serving Elon, stood and cleared his throat. I think we all owe you an apology, young lady, he admitted, his voice carrying across the room. Sophia looked up, startled by the unexpected acknowledgement. She nodded slowly, not out of forgiveness, but out of understanding. It's not just about me, she said, her voice steady. It's about remembering that everyone deserves respect, no matter who they are. A woman near the bar, who had previously whispered about Elon being a disruption, wiped at her eyes. We were wrong, she murmured, shaking her head. It shouldn't take someone being famous for us to treat them with kindness. The realization settled over the room like a heavy fog. People who had prided themselves on their sophistication and class were now reckoning with the harsh truth. They had failed a simple test of decency. The manager, still standing near Sophia, cleared his throat and adjusted his tie. From now on, he said, addressing the staff, we will be making some changes. This restaurant will stand for more than just fine dining. We will make sure that every person who walks through those doors is treated with respect. The servers, once hesitant to interact with Elon, nodded solemnly. The shift in the restaurant's atmosphere was palpable. The lesson had been learned, but it had come at a price, a mirror held up to their biases, exposing their flaws in the most public way possible. Sophia glanced at the exit, half expecting Elon to reappear, but she knew he wouldn't. His message had already been delivered. As the night wore on, patrons left the Copper Elm with more than just a meal in their stomachs. They left with a newfound awareness and understanding that kindness should never be conditional. Sophia, still holding the check, felt something else: pride. Not just for herself, but for the fact that even in a place clouded by judgment, one small act of kindness had managed to shine through. The lesson was simple, yet powerful. True character isn't revealed in grand gestures, but in the smallest acts of decency. And tonight, everyone in that room had been reminded of just how much those moments mattered. Elm underwent a quiet transformation in the weeks that followed. The management implemented new training focused on hospitality and respect, ensuring that every customer, regardless of appearance, was treated with the dignity they deserved. Staff members who had once judged Elon that night found themselves reevaluating not just their work, but their own biases in everyday interactions. Sophia, now balancing her job with her culinary studies, continued working at the restaurant, but something had shifted. Customers who once barely noticed their servers now made eye contact, offered kind words, and left more generous tips. The atmosphere at the Copper Elm changed, not through forced policy, but through genuine reflection and the impact of one unforgettable night. One evening, as Sophia wrapped up a shift, she noticed an elderly man struggling with his wallet at the register. The old her might have simply waited, letting impatience seep in. But now she stepped forward with a gentle smile. "Take your time, sir," she said softly. "No rush at all." The man looked up, surprised but grateful. It was a small moment, an unremarkable exchange. But Sophia knew that moments like these mattered more than people realized. Across the city, the story of Elon's experiment continued to resonate. People began sharing their own encounters with kindness, small gestures that left a lasting impact. Restaurants and businesses reflected on how they treated patrons, and discussions about empathy grew beyond social media debates and into real-world changes. As for Elon, he remained characteristically reserved about the experience. He had never set out to change the world in one night. He had simply wanted to understand it a little better. But even he had to admit that the ripples of that evening extended further than he anticipated. Months later, Sophia received an invitation in the mail, an exclusive event at a high-end culinary institute, one of the most prestigious in the country. At first, she assumed it was a mistake, but tucked inside was a note written in the familiar scrawl she had read once before: "Kindness never loses its value. Keep spending it." Sophia pressed the note against her chest, smiling as tears welled in her eyes. The path ahead was still uncertain, but one thing was clear: a single act of kindness had changed her life, and she intended to keep paying it forward. Because, as she had learned that night at the Copper Elm, the way we treat others, especially when no one is watching, defines who we truly are. The Copper Elm underwent significant changes after that night. Management introduced new training programs focused on empathy and respect, ensuring that all guests, regardless of appearance, were treated with dignity. Staff members, especially those who had been dismissive, found themselves reassessing their attitudes and biases. For those present in the restaurant that evening, the lesson remained unforgettable. Many returned to their daily routines with a newfound perspective, carrying the memory of that moment as a reminder to approach others with kindness. In the end, Elon's experiment became more than just a story about a billionaire in disguise. It delivered a profound message about the power of humanity, one that transcends wealth, status, and appearances. While the world moved on, Sophia and the others who had witnessed that night never forgot. It proved that true character shines brightest when it's least expected, and that one act of kindness can create ripples far beyond a single moment.